Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the 360 Experience podcast. I'm your host, Tim Brahim, and I'm really appreciative of you joining me today for my conversation with Rene Rodriguez. Now, Rene Rodriguez has been a teacher in the mortgage industry now for well over a decade, and his prominence has grown over the course of time rather significantly. He is a best-selling author of Amplify Your Influence. He is a keynote speaker within the industry, and his Amplify workshops have been getting rave reviews from many of my friends and clients who have attended them. They have found that they've had some real breakthroughs in their ability to communicate, which is a topic that Rene and I definitely will be talking about in our conversation today, because the art of communication and presenting is so critical in today's market. And there are a lot of suggestions that he and I will make in our conversation. We're also going to explore mindset, psychology, and how to influence people in a positive and ethical way, of course. So before I get to my conversation with Rene, what I want to remind you of is that we would love it if you subscribed to the show and forwarded it to anybody that you think would find it to be valuable. We are looking to grow our subscribership base so I can get more amazing guests like Rene on the show, and the more subscribers we have, the easier it is. Additionally, what I'll say is that if you're watching this on YouTube and you wouldn't mind commenting and liking the episode, if you do like it, of course, that would be wonderful. Lastly, is in the show notes, whatever channel you're watching this on, is a link to the downloads of the post-podcast coaching sessions that I've done for all of the episodes. So you can find them there, and we encourage you to go check that out because I think there's more value there for you as well. And without further ado, my conversation with Rene. It's been a really long time, man, and it's nice to see you. And thank you for being here. And I guess we should just start off by talking about our favorite scene from Pulp Fiction, shouldn't we?
This watch. Yeah. This watch.
This watch, yeah.
This uncomfortable hunk of metal.
Yes. For those that are listening that are familiar with the film, you know what scene we're talking about. And if for those of you that are not, you should go watch it, and we won't go any further because we want this to be PG-13. So, hey, let me just first start by congratulating you. This is really fun for me in the sense that we go way back, and just to give everybody a perspective. So many, many years ago now, 16, 17 years ago, Eric Mitchell was nice enough to introduce me to you. And my partner in Lone Toolbox, Rich Katz, and I decided that we were going to bring you in and have you do a full day, like off-site retreat with our company. And you did some amazing work with us and got us more deeply connected as a company. And then, there's stuff in between, of course, as we got to know each other better, but then like fast forward to now. And that I think it's really neat that there's been this huge gap in our connection, in the sense that it gives me an opportunity to just almost get to know you all over again and to congratulate you, because, you've really evolved, brother. And I'm so happy for you. I mean, you're an author, you're a wonderful speaker. So many of my clients have shared, really great things about your Amplify events. So congratulations on your evolution. And
Thank you.
I'm just really excited to just get to know each other again in this conversation.
I am too, man. And I'll never forget the conversations that we had after that event. And you, well, one, were the first person to truly give me a big stage. And so that is one of those, like, you never forget the people that believed in you way back then. Eric was the one that had this big vision. He knew to put me in front of you, and you immediately saw there was something there, which was something I'm forever grateful for. I mean, that I still have all those videos. I still have every single one of those things and what we created. But, you were also so far ahead of your time in how you thought about things. And you were saying back then, I remember you were like wiping tears. You're like, dude, I'm so going to monetize you, man. We're going to monetize this. And I'm like, what does monetize mean? That's so cool. I like the sound of that. But yeah, that was pretty special.
How old were you then? 30, maybe? I mean,
well, I'm 47.
Okay, so you're about 30. Yeah, that was probably about 17 years ago.
Yeah, 29, 30 years old, probably. Yeah, that was a long time ago. I'm getting old, man. I'm getting really old.
Well, you're not catching up to me. That's good news. I'm keeping pace with you.
Well, you still look the same as you did back then. Maybe a little gray here, but
Yeah.
still look the same.
All right. Well, let's kind of play around here and let's dive in. Like I didn't prep too much for this. I tend to not do so, especially for you, because I think that we'll certainly talk about, influence and presenting skills and selling and those types of things. But I also want to definitely go to the topics that, um, I guess a little background. So at that time, if we wind back to 17 years ago, you were introducing some topics that were like neuroscience based and psychological based. And this was pre me going to get my master's degree in spiritual psychology, which I then did later. But I always had this affinity and interest in this type of content. And so I want to make sure we spend some time there. Brain chemistry, the hormones of stress,
Absolutely.
how that affects our emotions and the way that we behave, et cetera. But let's just start with influence. It strikes me that influence is something that you have spent a lot of time thinking about, a lot of time teaching. What's the key to influence, if you could summarize that?
So my approach to influence is a little different than, because you think about one, typically the concept of influence is about this offensive strategy from me to you of how do I persuade you to do something, which is a big part of it. I mean, it's not that it's not a part of it, but it's a limiting piece of it. There's a deeper side of influence that I think transcends all of it. And, I always say, think about the opposite of influence, because if I get philosophical, I like to think about things from their opposite to truly understand them. And it's also a way for me to appreciate something. Like, just take it away, and what's life look like? So if you take away influence, I walk in a room and no one notices. I tell a joke, no one laughs. I sell a product and no one buys. I share an idea and no one cares. I cast a vision and no one follows. What's the feeling that follows that? If you kind of play that out, if I were to say, what words would you put to that?
Mm. You feel defeated. You feel
Defeated.
alone. You feel
Mm.
unseen. You feel rejected. I'll stop there, but I could go on further.
Yeah. I mean, those are perfect words. And some people might even say they feel insignificant.
Hmm.
Like the truest definition. Like, I am trying to be a cause to the world. I want to be a cause to an effect, and my cause has no effect. Therefore, I have no impact. And so then the questions begin. If you were in a meeting that you felt like you had no impact or no significance, your next thought would be, why am I here?
Yeah. Do I
If you were in
matter?
why do I, and why am I even here anymore? Right. I don't matter anymore. So therefore, why am I here? If I'm in a relationship where I have no significance and I don't seem to matter, I'm trying to cause something, there's no impact. Okay. Well, then why am I in this relationship? But the bigger piece is, if I felt like that in life and I didn't feel like I mattered in life, I didn't feel like I had an impact in life, the sad outcome might be, why am I even on this earth?
Hmm.
And so there's no purpose. So I wander aimlessly. Now, I could do several things for that. I could turn to drugs. I could turn to frivolous behavior, which I've done. I think we've all done. I could turn to suicide. There's all sorts of things that can happen there. And so to me, I go, okay, so let's go back to and add influence back. I walk in a room and people take notice. I tell a joke, people laugh. I sell a product, people are buying. I share an idea, people love it. And I cast a vision and I watch people follow. What are the words that come to mind now? What are you feeling?
Relevant, seen, purposeful, valuable, noteworthy. I'm just throwing out
Those are
stuff that comes
perfect.
to mind. Yeah.
I think those are perfect. I haven't even heard some of those right? I mean, people use that, but I think they perfectly match, because now I feel significant. And then why do I feel significant? Because I have impact. And so to me, influence is about finding your significance in this world, because and understanding the impact that you make, which can lead to a very close relative of where my purpose might be. And a lot of times the search for purpose, a great article in Psychology Today, I think, oh, actually, look at it right here. Find your purpose. So there's all
Mhm.
sorts of really cool research in it. I always grab to see what they're saying. But there's that feeling of purpose is very action oriented, talent oriented. And this must be why I'm here, people will say. Well, I'm doing this and look at the impact I'm having. Well, this may be why I'm here. And so I'm not saying it's the way to find purpose, but I think it's a really cool breadcrumb to start following. And so when it comes to influence, I think it has such a wide range of positive impact on someone's life. And I would venture to say that I think the lack of influence is one of the worst of human experiences, and having influence is one of the greatest.
So we're going to stay here for a while because I mean, there's a whole body of work just in this topic alone that I think is incredibly valuable from a perspective of business and from a perspective of having a quality life and feeling, you know, meaning in your life. There's a book. I don't know if you've ever read this book. I'm sure we're going to drop some book bombs during this conversations because we've read some of the same books, I'm sure, and then others that we should turn each other on to. So when I was in school, my professor recommended specifically me a book that for whatever reason he felt would resonate with me, and it did. It's called Power versus Force. Have you ever heard of this book by Hawkins?
My mother's neighbor.
Hawkings is the
Remember the
author.
courage scale?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what I was going to talk about. So it's the calibration of energy that he developed that calibration of energy scale, and the lowest rung on the ladder, the closest to death, is shame.
Mm-hmm.
And embodied or encompassed within shame is being shunned, not being seen, feeling stupid, feeling less than. I mean, what we're really talking about here when you're talking about entering that room and not being noticed is a vibration of energy that you're carrying in your body based upon your thoughts, which then trigger all kinds of emotions and chemicals in your body that become this perpetual negativity loop, versus the antithesis of what you described of actually feeling relevant, which then gives you momentum and some bounce in your step. So since you've read Power versus Force, let's just go there a little bit with it. Like, so I guess I'll throw this question out and then go wherever you want with it. But how does one find purpose and find relevance so they can, or find influence? Is there a formula that you've identified to uncover? If someone's sitting here going like, man, that's me, I feel that way a lot.
Yeah.
How do we help them find themselves?
Well, so if you remember in the course that we did, I showed the courage scale being above the line, below the line. And that was our rendition of his consciousness scale that was businessified, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was my mother's neighbor. They were dear friends for a long time. And so he was sort of an outside mentor. And I mean, we could go so deep on I love that you read that, and
twice. I read it twice. Yeah, I love that book,
and
man.
And I've got 3 copies sitting over there in the Eye of the Eye and the other books that he's written. But you know, in terms of purpose, with the way I look at it, I try to simplify it. And in the sense of, I think purpose, there's a couple pieces on it. One, I think purpose, there's a side of purpose that's a choice. That, you know, I think a lot of people go off and they try to discover or find their purpose, and instead of choosing it. And there's this thing of where I'm looking at, where do I find the most energy? Where do I seem to have the biggest impact on the world? And that becomes it. And there's a power in that choice. There's a power in saying, this is why I'm here. And I think there's an empowerment that comes with that as well, of saying, well, hold on a second. Like, okay, if you take a look at where you seem to have the most impact on people, and there's also a piece where, what brings you the joy that you're looking for. I'm not talking about happiness. I think happiness and joy are very different. And there's a topic we should talk about where I don't think happiness is the goal of life, but that might be an interesting.
We are going to talk about it because I heard you bring this up in the Modern Mortgage Summit, and I was like, okay, this is the one area where I'm going to challenge him. But go ahead, we'll get there.
I love
Don't
it,
worry.
and I'm open to learning.
Yeah, we're gonna bounce some ideas, but let's keep going. I don't want to break your rhythm.
Yeah, and I think that there's, you know, where do I find this joy? Where do I seem to have the biggest impact? And to me, the foundation for me is around gifts. And you know, if we want to go there, I'll share with you sort of my life's purpose, if you will. And it's I don't think I've ever shared it on a podcast, so this is interesting. Yeah, I don't think I have. I don't think I really share with anybody, but it's something I've had for a long time. But it's the culmination of a lot of stories that came together, and there's one of them is around the concept, and maybe it's true, maybe it's literal, maybe it's theoretical, or maybe it's symbolic, but that the world was created in 6 days and he rested the 7th, right? So there's a story somewhere out there that God created the world in 6 days. And so there's this ratio of 6 to 1, that it wasn't a 5 to 2 ratio. There's a 6 days work, 1 day rest. And part of my schooling when I went to school for behavioral neuroscience was also, I got a degree also in business, but most of the classes were around Christ, faith, the management of wealth, and the sort of the spiritual side of business language, which was really fascinating. And the concept of, okay, there's another word that was found in biblical texts, is one of the most common words found. It was the word toil, the sweat of the brow, hard work, right? There's putting effort in, pressing the seed into the soil. There's a lot of concept around just very hard work and even suffering in some senses, right? There was the suffering on the cross, and there's all sorts of concepts. Mother Teresa believed that suffering was the fastest way to find God. She had a $29 million budget, and the homes in Calcutta were somewhat horrific. And there's even concern that maybe thoughts that maybe that's why she's not being canonized, because of the fact that she didn't solve that problem. But in her thought, that's what it was. So the concept of work and saying, okay, excuse me. So I knew that work was a very important part of the spiritual reason for being here on earth. So then what about it? Okay, so then the story of the talents showed up in all four gospels. And the quick Jim Rohn version of the gospel, which I think he was always really good at doing that. And by the way, I'm not of any particular faith in that. I think that there's truth to be found in so many different books. And in fact, there's one book called Oneness, and on the back of that book, it said a quote from the Dalai Lama. And of course, now he's sucking kids' tongues, but the Dalai Lama is saying that every major religion of the world has one common goal, which is to make all their followers better people. And so I like that idea. So there's a lot to be found from, pulling from a lot of different truths. But the book took different concepts and found the same language in all the different texts, which to me says, okay, there's some truth to be found in all of that. But the story of the talents was simple. God comes down, gives one guy one talent, another guy 3 talents, another guy 5, says, go off and prosper, do something with these. Comes back to the person, he said, I give you 5, what'd you do? And the guy says, I turned them into 10. God says, high five, that was awesome. And person 3, what'd you do? He said, well, I turned him into 6. I said, that's my boy, good, high five, everything's good. And the one that says they gave him 1, what'd you do? He says, nothing, I hid it, I buried it. And it was said that God lost his mind. He was one of the most upset, angry he's been. And for me, what that meant was that we're all given a talent of some sort, or maybe multiple talents, and our job is to use those talents. So here he's got hard work and talent. And so then I go, okay, there's another study I learned from Jack Canfield, or is Jack Canfield, who's his partner? Remember him that wrote
Chicken Soup for the Soul, Mark Victor Hansen?
Was it Mark Victor Hansen, the one that wrote around the book, the Franklin side of Cubby? He was the
don't remember.
Yeah. So man, it was the first things first guy. Anyways, but he told a story, and he shared a study that was done. I think it was out of Connecticut, 2,700 near-death experiences. And in those near-death experiences, they interviewed people that died and then came back, and they wanted to find if there were any commonalities. And what they found were there were several commonalities. One, they all saw a light. Mm-hmm. And when you study psychology and things like that, it makes you skeptical of all this stuff. Then maybe there's something they kind of talk about, a part of the brain that lights up. Mm-hmm. But they all saw a light. And they also said they were approached by loved ones that have passed. But the common piece was that they were also asked 2 questions that seemed to come up over and over and over again. And those 2 questions I have sat with for over 30 some years. And they seem to be an answer to almost anything in life for me. And the first one was, did you gain knowledge? And I look at every hardship that I've ever had, and I'm like, did I learn something? Did I gain knowledge from that? Somebody stabbed me in the back. Well, did I gain something from this? And it's not a new idea, but God, what a powerful way to look at life, saying, did I gain knowledge? And the second one, did I expand my capacity to love? And so the word capacity to love, the capacity, I thought was interesting. It wasn't about loving when things were easy. It's easy to love when things are easy. Super easy. But with the capacity to love, then I can get into the concept of grace, the unmerited favor, unmerited love, unmerited favor of God. So if somebody doesn't deserve it, and I still can find a way to love them, that's like the weight room for love. Going to the gym and putting extra plates on. It's hard to move. It's hard to do. It's inconvenient. They don't deserve it. But man, that unmerited favor, maybe grace, and maybe the expanding my capacity to love during the most difficult times while I'm gaining knowledge. And so then I go, okay, so maybe my purpose is to utilize the gifts that God has given me and to expand my capacity to love, and to gain knowledge, expand my capacity to love, utilizing the gifts that God has given me in furthering his creation every day. And so that to me is sort of how I look at it.
That's a beautiful synopsis. I especially really appreciate the combination of the two, the gaining of the knowledge and expanding the capacity to love, because sometimes I believe that within a circumstance, within every circumstance, there's always something to learn if we choose to be curious. Curious is one of my favorite words in the English language. I think it's an incredible quality, archetype of your personality that is oftentimes laying dormant. I mean, when we're kids, we're very curious. That's why we learn and grow so much. We can become very stagnant and righteous as we get older, and invested in our egoic perspective. So, if somebody's doing something to you and it hurts, there's an opportunity for both of those situations right there. What can I learn about myself in this situation? What can I learn about another human being and their suffering and what they might be going through? And how can I expand my capacity for love? There's always, I find, Rene, there are a lot of people that I encounter, and I'm sure that you do as well, that are in their worst of scenarios, steeped in a victim archetype, which is a very challenging archetype to get out of. I think one of the most challenging components of the human experience is when you are in that victim archetype. And then there are people that are just, maybe they're not victims, or maybe they're just slightly a victim, but they're kind of lost and don't know where to go to find purpose. And I'd love to get your take on this, but what I'll share with you is that, there's a whole bunch of different people that I've studied on this topic of, like, Joseph Campbell, Finding Your Bliss, or Sir Ken Robinson about finding your element, as an example. And what I believe to be true is it's an inward journey. So those that are challenged of finding their gifts and finding their purpose, Ken Robinson used a great metaphor. He said that finding your gift, finding your element, as he puts it, is like digging for natural resources in the ground. They're there, but you have to dig for them. They may not be on the surface of the earth. You have to go inward and ask yourself these critical, curious questions about, like, what am I here to do? What lights me up? You mentioned that earlier. I think to check inside with oneself and to feel in our body what the energetic experience is when you're engaged in something is an incredibly important process versus playing solely out on the mental level, because people are always searching on the mental level for, what am I meant to do? What is my purpose? What are my gifts? And you have to go inward, I find, to really find that. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. The toughest questions are the ones that you can answer without ego. And I was talking to somebody about this, and I was saying, can you sit in the mirror? Can you sit down and answer yourself some tough questions? Like, even was I good today? And answer that question without ego. Did I do good today? Was I the best I could have been? Did I fully prepare? Am I ready? Am I the person that has earned this yet? Do I have more work to do? Is there, what can I learn here? Those questions without the ego stopping in the process. I mean, and one of the things I hear so many good things, and I get so jealous every time I hear them, is the processes that you take people through, and people that typically don't stop to ask the tough questions, very transactional based, typical businesses, and going back and saying, well, let's go back and answer some of these really difficult questions. One of my mentors always asked me, he says, what's the leader that people expect from you? What's the leader that people expect when you walk in a room? And that's a hard question, because it requires me to be really honest. And sometimes I don't like the answer. I'm like, God, there's been times in my life when I've been the know-it-all. And I'm like, and to be able to say that out loud, going, shit, I think they expect the guy that thinks he knows it all. Oh, that's not fun, because it's not who I want to be. But then I got to go into, okay, well, where's that come from? Okay, well, if I think I'm the know-it-all, then that means that I'm not open to something new. Well, what am I scared of?
There we go.
Okay, well, what am I scared of? And saying, okay, well, it's if I'm the know-it-all and I'm not open to something new, maybe I'm scared of not being enough. And, well, am I a fraud? So there's this quiet, it's just like,
But
okay,
hey,
hold on a
you be
second.
careful of that rabbit hole, bro. You can end up down
Yeah.
deep in there judging the hell out of yourself. But yes, I think that the question, that one question that you asked was so powerful. Like, you said, what am I scared of? Or what is my
Yeah.
fear? Because
Yeah.
I think fear drives a lot of our personality constructs, and oftentimes it's, again, back to what we were talking about, like fear of not being enough, fear of not, being seen, fear of not being liked. And then we develop these structures, these strategies within our personality structure to to make ourselves feel safe and protected. But then at some point in time in our life, we'll be like, oh shit, this isn't working for me anymore. This
Yeah.
strategy has a lot of dysfunction associated with it. So how did you uncover, well, what is your purpose and how did you identify it?
Well, I think, well, part of what I'd shared with you is the journey of asking those questions and really asking, what am I good at? Where do I find joy? What are the things that truly drive me? Where do I have the biggest impact? And then saying, okay, there's a vision too of like, who am I drawn to? Because there's that, I think, is a big piece of it. Because I'm always trying to find clues and wanting people to find clues. Who are you drawn to? Who are the people that you look up to? And then describe them. And then what's the delta between you and them? And there's something there. Who are they and why? And to me, the process of saying, okay, I had to deal with a lot of voices, right? In terms of the voices that said I wasn't going to do something, I shouldn't do this, I'm not big enough, and I can't. And it's the challenge with this conversation is that it sounds so cliche because I've got the inner voices. I think everybody does, and but I can only share my journey. I had from a early childhood all sorts of reasons why I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and all sorts of voices and experiences that proved, if I allowed to narrate it that way, and that narrative was very live and real for a long time, that I wasn't good enough. And one of those probably comes from not knowing my dad. And so, okay, so obviously now we know the role of the father and how critical that is in those time periods. And not knowing that, saying, okay, well, the human spirit is going to search for that answer at some place. It should have gotten it from dad, but it didn't. So then it goes on a search. And I went to coaches. I went to my parents, my friends' parents. I went to, as I got older, business partners, older clients, searching for that validation. And I didn't get it for a long time. And I started realizing that, and this is not something it was an easy journey, clearly. And I can tell you all the million crazy therapies my mother put me through, from holotropic breath work to immersions to primal screaming to healing ceremonies, sun dances, you name it, est and landmark. And I mean, you name it. My mother was in the center of all that stuff. And me as a kid growing up through that, well, you probably got to put you in this. And as crazy as it was, it did give me a lot of different ways to look inside. But that process of looking internally and saying, okay, well, and to be quite honest, I don't know if I've even quieted the voices. I think I just don't believe them anymore because they're still there. I think I've gotten to the place where I've had to say, I have to look at the external experience on some of this instead of the inner voice that's telling me this. And, I think they've shifted too, because I can go with, okay, so I've conquered some of them around, let's say being on a stage. Okay, so I don't really have any voices of doubt on that piece. But then there's a whole financial side to things too, which I think I'm probably still wrestling with. Yeah, do I do well? Yeah, okay, I do pretty well, but not where I could be or should be, or where I really need to be. And so then I'm like, okay, what is that old tape? What's playing there? Growing up, with a mother who was a nun, and we didn't care about money and shit. And if I want validation, what better way to get validated and to do something for free for you, right? Because I can give you all this value and I can do it for free. Because why would I ask for money? And I mean, there's all sorts of crazy pieces, and I think that I don't know if that journey ever stops. In some ways, some people maybe they do, and they found that top of the scale of enlightenment. I'm not there for sure, but I think it's one of those that is continual search for me, at least. And conversations like this, where, man, I got to ask myself questions that I don't want to ask myself, but man, there's always something really good on the other side of it. but it's painful through it.
Yeah. Or I mean, yes, it can be painful. And it can also be, if if you evoke curiosity, it could be a process of, you know, it doesn't have to be painful. I think it depends upon the frame. And I know that you believe very much in frame. And I think you said some things that I want to just drill down on a little bit more, maybe even ask you a question about. So these tapes, right, that you're playing, that we all play in our head, what I have studied, and if you want to comment on this in a moment, feel free to, because you've probably done even more studying on it than I have, is that the mind seeks to prove itself accurate. So whatever story we're telling ourselves, we're projecting that out onto the world, and we're literally on a subconscious level looking for proof of the story that we're telling. Conversely, there's a really interesting thing that you hit on, which is in looking at people that you admire. So I once had it explained to me by my professor this way, is that, in psychology, which I know you've studied a lot of, there's projections, but then there's positive projections. So when you see something in somebody that you admire and revere, what's actually happening there is that you are recognizing that part of you that exists that is that way on a subconscious level. You're seeing your own beauty in the mirror. It's just that you haven't owned it yet. So I actually think this is a really important piece for people to consider, is when you're looking for what your purpose is and you're asking yourself these critical questions, it is a very important part of the process to identify the people whose qualities you admire, and then ask yourself the question, how are you that way as well? And how can you further cultivate that quality that you already possess? Because here's the reality of it, and this is a metaphor that my professor used. If I see in you a quality that I'm like, wow, man, I really think that's a beautiful quality in him as a person, as a skill that he possesses, whatever. If I didn't have that in me, it would be like me hearing Chinese, and I don't speak Chinese. Okay. So the only reason that I can even see it is because I recognize that it is a part of me. And that's an important thing, I think, for people to remember, because we idealize so much. And that's a part of that other tape that we play in our head of like, oh, if I could only be like, and then you're going to look for evidence of how you're not like that person, versus, oh, man, I really like how present that person is. And wow, I can really be present myself sometimes. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to look for opportunities to be present. You're going to look to reward yourself emotionally with presence. So in closing, and then like unpack any of this or all of it, if you'd like, I'm also acutely aware of that tape, that narrative that's playing in all of our heads, also has a dramatic impact on brain chemistry. It has a dramatic impact on the hormones that are excreted from our pituitary gland throughout our body. And it's a really big body of work, especially in light of what we've been through over the last 6-8 months in the mortgage industry, where people are understandably so struggling, but also looking through the lens of struggle, looking through the lens of what is not good. And it's so important to rewire our brain and to refire new neural pathways in our brain. And that takes work, and it's a discipline. So go, man. I'm sure you've got a lot to say about that.
Well, one, I love that. I love that what you're saying there on, for me to even be able to see the good in somebody, by definition, means I have it in me. And I mean, what a beautiful way to look at things, and a beautiful frame to function from. It's the same in pharmacology. For an external drug to work on me, I have to have that receptor site already built inside of me, and because there's a drug inside of me already, so I can create the same effect internally, which is really fascinating. And I think that I believe you need both of these. The reason I use the word suffering and struggle and happiness, it's moreover to get people to reframe what struggle and suffering means. And I think that there's some people that, and it's not about being negative at all. It's not about trying to embrace the suck and all that sort of stuff, this macho sort of view of things, because it's not that, even though it can sound like that. It's moreover, I think that there's two pieces to this. One is this really beautiful side of what we can be, and that I love the positive projection piece. I don't know if I've even heard of that. I love that, but it fits everything that I've seen. And the positive projection side, I think what we need to is reframe the difficult stuff of life. And what I've seen is the simple, tangible example is the gym. I don't know if there's really any way to become healthier, stronger without suffering or putting your muscles through some pain in some ways. Now there's yoga and things like that, but yoga at first is hard.
Hmm.
Like for me, it is really hard. My hips hurt. They're too tight. But on the other side of the quote unquote pain of going through that and staying consistent, learning how to breathe, and there's this massive joy that's way better. But I had to kind of go through the flames in there. You go back to the stories of old of why did the dragons hoard gold? Well, okay, so what is what every man wants or every woman wants is the treasures of life. And well, what do they fear the most? The dragon. Well, the only way to get to the gold is to face the proverbial dragon. And so that was interesting. There was the story of the snakes and Moses. And what did God say? He said, go take your. There was the snakes that were infesting, and people were dying, and they went to Moses. Your God's killing us, and he went back and asked God, what do you do? He says, you take your staff, you put it in the ground, and have them face the snake. And all of a sudden, they had to face the snake, and all of a sudden, the snakes went away. And so there's this fear and pain of being able to face the thing that's most difficult. And if you can reframe it, there's a there's something there's a man there's a what's the word, there is a privilege in pain and suffering sometimes. And there's a privilege in because you loved somebody, because man, like I got to, if I lost you, man, I'd be sad and I'd be suffering. Well, what the privilege in that is that I knew you, and because I knew you, I have to endure this. And so there's this way to look at that, and it makes me more empathetic, it makes me more compassionate, but it gives me contrast of life. It gives me the ability to look at, I can understand the good because I understand what bad is. And the thought of, both of those existing is the only way I know the world. And the more that I've experienced the pain, the more I can appreciate the good. And so then I go, okay, I was telling a group of people, I said, the market it's interesting right now. It's difficult. For some of you, you're not ready for it. And guess what? Welcome to one of your greatest lessons that you're going to be able to tell a story about. Embrace that this is going to be scary. Embrace this is going to be hard. You're going to be tested, but you're going to learn something. And enjoy the beauty of the lesson of life that you can't. We've all squandered something. We've all missed something. We waited too long to say I love you. Well, then it was too late. Well, guess what? What a beautiful lesson. Don't ever do that shit again. Don't you? I mean, you got in a fight with somebody and they died. Well, maybe I should really wonder the words that I say before I say goodbye to somebody. Well, that's a lesson. Holy wow. And that changes who you are. And the whole word of amor fati. Have you heard of amor fati? Amor fati, depending on how you say it. Amor fati.
Is that Roman?
I think so, or Latin, one of those two.
Okay.
I think it's Latin. So amor, love, fate. Fati means fate and story.
Mm-hmm.
It's to love your story, but two pieces of that. One is the embracing of life as it is, not as you wish it would have been. And even the tragedy, you got to love even the tragedies of your life. And so, because you can't change them, and if you go back and you love them and you learn from them, all of a sudden they are of utility, which fits the science of why memory exists. Memory doesn't exist so we remember things. Memory exists so that we can draw from that a lesson to make us safer going forward. And if we keep having a recurring memory, well, you haven't revisited and gone back and revisited and drawn something from that memory so that you don't experience the danger anymore. That doesn't even exist. It's just a memory. And so, like, all of those things, you say, okay, so then there's that side. But then there's also what I hear you say too, which is so critical, is to say there's this beautiful side that can feel effortless and so in tune and so congruent and so coherent, that all the things are aligned when you find where maybe you're supposed to be and what seems most effortless. And so I think we have to have the frame of being able to exist in both of those, of being able to say, I can reframe the suffering, because there's so many times that I'm in it right now. I am in the process of such a major change in our business that is really hard, because it's forcing me to be different. I spoke 235 days last year. People say, wow, congrats. And I go, but really? Yeah. So I maximized the wrong business model and got the speaker fee to where I wanted 35,000. Yeah, but man, that was the goal, but wrong goal. And so, okay, so I have to relearn what it means to have a business that doesn't require my time. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be, I don't put time into it, but that it isn't directly correlated to work, travel, pay. That I could do some work strategy, build something that is ongoing value that I can go then at least sleep and people can get value from, which is much more sustainable. It's scalable. But that requires a completely different mind shift, which internally goes back to my initial piece, which was, God, Tim, am I good enough to, am I worthy of it? You know, like all those questions, but maybe, you know, and my team knows that every time we offer a product, every time we're doing a deal, I always will say, okay, well, if you pay that, you know what? Hey, why don't we do a couple episodes together? We'll do a couple webinars. And they're like, Rene, stop making more work. I'm like, but he's paying so much because we do charge a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then this guilt kind of goes over. Oh, I better give more. Right. I can't
Well,
have it.
but that's where, like, so this goes to the slowing things down, going inward.
Yeah.
So, all right, what am I feeling right now? If I decide to say no to those 2 webinars, checking inside, oh man, I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling like I don't want them to not like me. I'm feeling like I owe them something because my mom was a nun. I feel like I need to give them more than they're expecting from me so they like me. But most people are just moving so quickly that they're making decisions without pit stopping and
Yeah.
going inward. And on the thing about like the 235 days a year, which, I mean, when you said that number, I didn't think congratulations, to be honest with you. I thought, oh man,
I knew you wouldn't. You're smart enough not
I
to.
felt like, oh shit, man, that must have been a tough year last year. But that's just information.
Yeah.
That's data for you to look at and go, huh, okay.
Yeah.
You know what? That's a little bit too much for me. I'm gonna now work on a new part of my business model that really allows for me to cultivate, a little bit less dependency on the business of me. Um, keep going. I mean, I just, sorry for jumping in there. I want to get to the subject matter of communication in a little bit, but keep going with what you're sharing in this realm.
Well, and I love your insights on it. So interrupt me anytime because part of it is I'm trying to also, I guess, model and should be really transparent with, which is the journey that I think all leaders go through. With
Mm-hmm.
and in that journey of self-reflection, which goes into the next piece that goes back to, even let's go back to when I studied business ethics and Christ, faith, and management of wealth, and all of these things. We spent 2 years, actually 3 years, studying work and leisure. And I agree, okay, so work is work, leisure is play. Going have a beer with your buddies, going to play the game, going to watch a fight. And we learned that, and it took me forever, and I still am in this process of learning this, is that leisure isn't about play. Leisure is contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
Leisure is, at the end of each day God created earth, he asked himself one question: did I do good? That was the egoless question of, did I do good? And was I a good person today? And if he did, he rested well. And that act of contemplation, reflection, prayer, there's so many acts of just, Bill Burr has a great, if you like Bill Burr, the comedian, he's got a great joke. He's, everybody needs to get blasted in the face every once in a while. Every guy has gotten in a fight. He said something stupid. He got blasted in the face on the drive home. He's like, you know what? I'm kind of an asshole back there. And it's that moment of honesty,
Yeah.
of just, I probably wasn't good. And, that's more of the humor side of it. But there's, at some point you got to ask yourself, man, did I do the right thing? And that act of contemplation is said in some cases is the highest form of prayer, because it's the one thing that actually changes. Now, what's interesting, and I'm just learning into this too, and you and I should talk about this, and I'll send you what I've got on it. But the act of contemplation, of saying, here, I wasn't good, I need to do this. If you do that somewhere before you go to sleep, there's a set of neurons that earmark that come in, specifically earmark that change that's needed. And the moment you go to sleep, go to work on creating new pathways.
Mm.
And
I have
it's
not heard that. That's amazing.
fascinating. I was turned on to by Andrew Huberman.
I listen to the Huberman Lab all the time, bro. It's one of my favorite podcasts.
I knew you would. I'll send it to you. But there's this specific set of neurons that go in and they go, oh, this change needs to happen. If the contemplation and sort of the reflection is what I've gotten from this, because I went and studied a little bit further, if the true vision of what it is and the true feeling is created, they earmark that for change. And so that goes back to everything you and I've always talked about, is that, the beginning of change is self-awareness, and the inner journey of saying, okay, I need to do this, and the understanding of how is this affecting other people, and what are all the people that this is affecting. And if I truly go into that, the brain now sets the intention to do that. It's not this intention like the secret kind of this airy fairy thing. There's an actual science that's going on there. And so this work and leisure was the act of contemplation and reflection.
I want to reframe a question that you've referenced, and it's probably based upon the theological studies that you had. Does it have to be, did I do good today? And the reason that I ask that question is because, to me, there's a setup there for self-judgment, like, which I feel like there's never really any major payoff in self-judgment. Can it be, what did I learn today? Or who was I today where I would like to be different tomorrow or something? Do you feel like that? Do you ever feel like when you're answering that question, because that's not a question that I would ask myself because I want to steer clear of the self-blame game. Do you feel like when you're answering that question, it's ever like, no, I did like shit today and I'm really pissed off at myself? Does it ever end up in that?
Yeah, well, I think T.S. Eliot had a great quote. He said that just because something's been abused does not neglect its use. So just because judgment has been abused does not neglect the need for it every once in a while. Or the self-reflection of saying, I was kind of a jerk. And to me, I can say that without going into shame, because I think the barometer of where it's too much is shame.
Mm-hmm. Back to power versus force. Correct. Can you say it with curiosity? Like, man, I think I was really a jerk today, huh? Like, why did I show up that way? That's interesting. Let me look at that,
And even validation to somebody else. I was wrong. Like that was not right what I did. I was mean and I was cruel. And if I don't go into shame, I can immediately move into change. Mm-hmm. And so there's a power in acknowledging sort of the fact that I was not good in that sense. And because I think that the elimination of judgment in some cases can be dangerous in the self-reflection game, in the self-awareness game but it's also dangerous because it's, to your point, it's a double-edged sword. I can go down this rabbit hole of just critical, and I can not find myself out. And so,
well, what happens then, if let's go back to what you were saying earlier, you go down the rabbit hole of beating the shit out of yourself. Oh man, I wasn't the best version of myself. I don't like how I showed up, whatever. So now you have to have a mechanism to make yourself feel better. And typically the mechanisms / strategies that we have to make ourselves feel better are the very things that got us into that rabbit hole in the first place. So you'll go out and you'll be excessively compliant, or you'll go out and try to prove yourself by overcommitting to 235 speaking engagements in a year, which then wear you out, have you edgy, have you non-present, and then you're an asshole to your wife. I hope that's not autobiographical, by the way, but I'm just giving you you see what I'm saying? It's like, that's
except the asshole to my wife.
Good. But that's where that's where I think it's like really important to step back. And I love what you said earlier. And I think this is how you said it, of that it's the contemplation that is the initial seedling for change. Okay. And or maybe you didn't say it that way, but essentially that's such an important piece. And what I want to make sure that everybody's hearing that's listening into this conversation is, the question that I have is, how much time do you intentionally allot for contemplation? Because if you want to grow, and if change is the component that is embedded within growth, and you need to self-reflect and contemplate to evoke change, how could you ever change if you're not going to slow down, journal a little bit, read some contemplative text that resonates for you, meditate, which is another great way to get really clear on some awarenesses. When the mind starts to slow down, you start seeing thought patterns. I mean, shit, man, like I did a 4-day silent retreat in Joshua Tree like 6 years ago, where for 16 hours a day we meditated. And when we were not, when we were awake, we couldn't, talk to anybody, look at anybody in the eye, read, write. You want to talk about getting familiar with the tape? Like I
Wow.
watched the tape play, man. After a few days, I was like, holy shit, man, there's a lot of crazy making going on in here. And this is a lot of story that I don't need to be buying into. But
Yeah.
but like stopping, even if it's just a half hour, like what is your morning routine? Like in the mornings, that's when I contemplate. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you know this. This is interesting. So I had this spiritual teacher for quite a long time, 7 or 8 years. I'm still connected with him, but we would see, he lives in India. I met him in India. I went and saw him a couple times in India, and then he came and stayed with me 3 different times for 3 straight weeks and lived with me. So I had this like amazing experience with this yogi in my life.
Awesome.
It was incredible. And one of the things that he taught me was that if you look at every one of the major religions slash philosophical bodies like the Greeks or Marcus Aurelius, etc., they all knew that there's a very sacred hour that you contemplate, and that's 4 a.m. But it's for
I
a
didn't
very,
know that.
but it's for a very, so like a lot of the Jesuit priests, they pray at 4 a.m. The yogis at 4 a.m. they meditate. But this you're going to find fascinating. There's a very specific reason as to why, and I
Taking
learned
notes when I look down here.
that's cool. I learned this from Dispenza and doing a lot of Dr. Joe's work. That's when the pineal gland
Mm.
is most open, because the melatonin has had its lasting impact to have an open pineal gland, which gives you an expanded
Love science.
consciousness. And it's so cool. But, and we're geeking out, you and I right now, but for
Oh,
for the
I'm
listener,
so excited you said pineal.
I just want to make sure that everybody understand the pineal gland is like the master gland of consciousness. It's at the base of your at the back of your head and the base of your head, right? And it's a very amazing component of our body, and it's what allows for us to be highly conscious. We have the capacity to be super conscious and see things really clearly. This is science, and you can tap into that by contemplating, by meditating, by praying at those early hours of the morning before the sun comes up. And that's where you learn and grow. And you can get, I mean, I get amazing business ideas at that. I don't get up at 4. I'm a little lazy. I get up at like 5, but early is when I contemplate. And then I'll just be like, shit, I get these
Yeah.
moments of clarity, you know? So back to you, man. Sorry that I hijacked that, but I got a little bit excited there.
No, I love this. I love the back and forth because I'm seeing this as sort of like what I love about this is that I'm testing, even not testing, but just throwing out what I've been thinking, and I love the search for truth here in that. But that 4 a.m. you got me thinking because there's two pieces to it. I think that you asked me about when do I contemplate, and I think that contemplation is a reflection backwards, right? There's of who I was, and there's the self accountability of what changes do I need to make. Was I aligned with my values? Is really what it really all comes down to. Did I live my values today? Was I a generous person? Was I somebody that was listening? Was I compassionate? Was I kind? Was I did I work hard today? Like there's something about, did I really give a full day to this beautiful day I was given? Did I put my gifts to work? And going back to the relationships and people that I talked to, I go back to, was I good? Was I a good person? And I think there's something about being a good person and then being able to be honest with yourself when you weren't, because there's times when I wasn't. I was on a on a plane, and this is a few 6 months ago maybe. I was in the got last minute seat, so I was in the window seat, and the guy that had the center seat just had his elbows out, right? It was just one of those center seat guys that could have claimed stake of the piece. And I'm 6'3", 270 pounds. So the curvature of the plane has me already kind of like this. And so now I'm being pressed in by the windows. He's pressing me in this way. I got a 3.5-hour flight. I'm looking at him and he's just locked in. He's not moving. I decide, no big deal, let it go. So I lean forward. And if that's the case, I just kind of lean forward and I just do my thing. And, but then silently, I'm kind of waiting for him to, think I'm not paying attention. He moves his arm. I come back and I'll take a skate for a little bit. But, that really didn't happen. He was just kind of this jerk the whole flight. And then finally, I was getting out and, I had my bag or my laptop and everything. And, when you're back in exit, you want to get your bag, go back to your seat and put all your stuff away so you don't become the bottleneck. And so anyways, he goes out and boxes me out from doing out there. And I said, excuse me, I'm gonna get my bag. And he turns over his shoulder and says, why don't you wait your turn? Now I'm 3.5 hours into this fucking asshole and I've lost it. And sorry, I hope we can swear on your podcast. We can.
It happens it happens frequently. I'm surprised it took so long.
Okay, good. Okay, good. This fucking asshole. And so I go, actually, and I said, if you don't move, I'm gonna move you. And now everyone's paying attention. And so I move his bag and I go get my stuff. And he's like, okay, so now you're gonna be an asshole. So now I turn around and I'm nose to nose with him. I said, I don't know if I heard you correctly. I said, why don't you say that again? And I'm not going to do anything, but now I'm clearly bigger than the guy. I'm clearly like just the size difference. And I'm also, he knows that was the wrong thing to say. Now my ego is just going, right? Mm-hmm. And I go, see, your mouth ran a little bit faster than your brain, didn't it? Because now everyone knows what you said. And now I'm going to stand here and be an asshole.
You said that to him.
Like, oh yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not who I want to be, Tim.
That's
what I used to be. I used to be that guy. I used to get in fights. I used to do that. And in the moment, I was just so upset. I called my wife and I said, calm me down because I'm being stupid. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not beating myself up.
No, wait, you called her while you're still on the plane?
Still on I went back and I sat back down and I said, and I said, and I go, the joke was, I'm about to get arrested on the plane. I knew I wasn't, but one is, I don't know what he was going through. Mm-hmm. I don't know what his life was. Mm-hmm. Maybe he was in a bad day. Maybe his wife has cancer. I don't see that's who I want to be. And that's why I try to be a lot of the time, but I wasn't. And I remember he was so scared. He got off that plane and went as fast as he could. Now I wasn't going to do anything. I don't fight anymore. But man, that night I sat in bed and I'm like, God, what a fucking asshole I was. And I'm like, what was I proving? Like, am I that small that I had to prove that? Like, am I like, what was I trying? And I went after myself. No shame though. But you know what? A moment of shame, there's a purpose for a little bit of shame. I was ashamed of my behavior. Now I wasn't identifying with it. Maybe that's it. I'm thinking out loud here. I wasn't saying that's who I am. It was that moment, my behavior. And there's one of the 5 emotions, disgust. I was disgusted with myself. That's the purpose of disgust, to repel you from something. And I allowed myself to feel that disgust. And I'm like, not who I want to be. And I was like, okay, I'm done with that. And I woke up the next day, not like, but just being much more self-aware. And of course, a lot of flights, a lot of jerks, a little bit more breathing. And maybe it was that moment of reflection that allowed me just to even be a little bit more present in that. And yeah, I was hard on myself, but you know what? I deserved it. And I didn't go beyond anything, but it was like, I needed to feel that that's just not who I was. What if I had a client watching? How embarrassing would that have been? What if I had, what if someone's kid was watching? What if his kid was watching? You know, I mean, there's all sorts of things. I'm like, okay, Rene, wake up, stop being a dick and just relax. It's not a big deal. Right. And so that contemplation was, I thought, merited me being pretty hard on myself.
So I feel like, first of all, thanks, bro, for being so vulnerable and sharing that amazing story. I mean, I think it's an amazing story because of the vulnerability. And it's also a story that I would have to imagine that 95% of the people that are listening to this, me being one of them, can relate to in some form or another, because we all lose our shit sometimes and don't show up as the best version of ourselves. For me, this is where contemplation can come back into the equation with curiosity, which is, like, what happened to me in that moment? Because what I know, I'm going to speak for you for a minute, or I'll put myself in your, I'll put myself in,
I want it.
Well, I'll put myself in your shoes, because I've had a similar version of that happen. I know that in that moment, when I slow it down, because it happens really fast, you get triggered, you fire back, you want to crush somebody with your words or physically. And then on the aftermath of it, it's like self-judgment. So when I slow it down and I ask myself, all right, wait, what was I feeling? All right, my heart was racing. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. Okay, which is if you know anything about the energy centers of the body, that governs your relationship with yourself, the third energy center. Okay, so
Down in the stomach. Okay.
yeah, the solar plexus. So when you feel those butterflies, that's all that is a surge of energy in the third energy center. When you feel your heart, swell because you see something beautiful, that's your fourth center surging with energy. So that energy center, that's your solar plexus. That's why people, when they're ashamed, they put their, if you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, they put their arms down. You see somebody sitting there like that, they're protecting themselves on a subconscious level. So I feel it in my belly. I felt it, my heart racing. Okay, I felt fear. I'm speaking for myself now, not you. I felt fear. I felt how did this feel familiar? Oh, this feels really familiar. This is what my dad did to me. Okay. Because you're talking about, I agree with you. You want to feel, the idealized version of Rene wants to feel compassion for that guy. And you're absolutely right. We don't know what that guy was going through, was throwing elbows at you, but maybe he was having a shit day and he just found out that his mom died. I mean, we don't know. But how about having compassion for you? So
my mom was dying in that moment. That's another part of that story. Actually.
Yours was.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, man. I mean,
but
all the more reason for you to have compassion for yourself. So it's easy to push that, like in the throes of the self-judgment and self-criticism. I'm going to idealize myself. I should have been more patient. I should have been more compassionate. Okay, maybe so. But I personally don't think there's a lot of payoff in beating the shit out of myself, because I haven't really addressed the real issue, which is why in that moment was I unable to find myself, who I really am, and say, I don't know what this guy's going through right now, but he must be having a hard day and I'm not going to take it personally. I think that's the body of work. That's the exploration of what happened in that moment where I lost myself. I fell asleep. I got into my ego. I wasn't able to see from those compassionate perspectives. That's where the inquiry, the contemplation goes. And to me, that is, the essence of the human experience. And you're right. You said it earlier. It never ends. This isn't, I don't think many of us are going to find enlightenment in this lifetime, but we can sure as shit try to get there. One rung of the ladder at a time. And yeah, man, I had a similar situation where I was on a flight with my daughter, man, and I got mouthy with the cabin steward, and she threatened to land the plane over Nicaragua or coming up from Costa Rica. And then afterwards I was like, oh man, Tim, what is the matter with you, man? Like, come on, like, why don't you just walk away and go sit down and send her love, But that's a part of the human experience, brother.
Totally.
What are the common denominators of top originators in the mortgage business? They're well scripted. They have a system for marketing themselves that generates leads. They manage an effective database, and they have strong referral partner relationships. The other common denominator of many great originators is that they have a business and life plan, a roadmap, a guide for them to achieve success, and they have an ally, a coach, who assists them in the successful implementation of that plan. Performance Experts Performance Accelerator private one-on-one 1-year coaching program is now accepting applications. This is my company, and these are my certified coaches that specialize in the mortgage business. Go to www.mortgagecoachingnow.com and click on Get a Coach, or go to the show notes and click on the link that's provided in this episode. Now let's get back to the show. Communication. So I've been thinking about this lately. Everybody has social media reels. Everybody has YouTube clips, a lot of people are going in that direction. People are wanting to present in front of real estate agents and present, the market and where inflation's going, all these types of things. And I've been thinking, wow, communication, number one, is art. And it's art and science, I think, to some extent, but there's a lot of art to communicating. Everything from presenting body language. I mean, you're a master of a lot of this stuff, which is why I want to talk about it. And I know that the people that go to Amplify come back feeling like they learned a ton from you in this realm. And I was thinking, the loan originator's job has changed. Their job description has changed, or at least what is important within that job description and needs to be amplified, no pun intended, is different now than it was a year ago. And what an originator really needs to be now is a great communicator and a great presenter of information in today's market. So what are some of the, let's just take a, I mean, we've both done a lot of presenting in our lives. So let's just go there and play off each other as to what are some of
Yeah.
the important things about presenting and communicating that our listeners should know from you.
Well, let's get really specific. Let's get really specific, because we can we can talk about the importance of presentation. That's the only way value is communicated, and we can talk about in an AI world. People ask me, "What do you think AI is going to do?" I said, "Well, I think it's going to make the in-person presentation a hell of a lot more valuable, because you can't AI your physical presentation yet, at least, right?" So there's a differentiator there, but I think that the presentation embodies so many different pieces where I'm trying to say, okay, in communication, I'm sending an idea from me to you. And so that seems simple. Like I should be able just to say, here's the idea. But there's so many things in how we interpret reality that get in the way of that communication. And I've gone down the path of sort of
sorry, just so I'm clear, how we as the receiver of that information interpret reality.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
So, yeah. And so this is, and this will be a fun kind of, because you kind of went down there around the concept of narrative and frame. And narrative and frame to me are really close cousins, if not brother and sister. And the frames are constructs of reality, and so is a narrative. Narratives is how we construct reality in the stories that we share. It's how we, it's a narrative is how we remember things. It's how we chunkate our experiences. And the narrative right now is I'm on a podcast with my good friend Tim, and that narrative makes sense. And so the way we explain life to ourselves also goes back to the prefrontal lobe and how it looks at behavior and has to have an explanation for it. It has to create a narrative, a story to really embody it. One of I think the biggest studies, and we can come back to the split brain studies. I'm going to write it down here in case we want to come back to it, which was one of the first sort of ways that I looked at how that narrative can change reality, even if it's completely wrong. And so, which comes back to is reality does not equal truth. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So if I'm saying, okay, if you're functioning from a certain narrative, let's say that salespeople are bad, or if I'm a used car salesman, like think of all the narratives that are triggered and the frames of reference that are triggered from the audience. Now I'm dealing with me communicating an idea into a very unwelcoming environment. And so it's not just about what I'm saying. It's about, okay, well, the soil isn't tilled. And so I always tell people, would you plant a seed in cement? And you wouldn't. I wouldn't plant a seed on this table. Well, there's nothing to grow. And so the first step isn't planting the seed. It's not sharing the idea. It's not speaking. The first step is preparing the soil, preparing the audience. And go back to my book, one of the pieces, I think chapter 3 says sequence is everything. And in that sequence I outlined, there's a lot of the offensive strategy of communicating and influence is what do I say, but not much is done around how do I prepare an audience to hear. And that's where I think sort of the big secret is around where Amplify is. It's a lot of time is around how do I first be really aware of the audience and the environment I'm about to communicate into. And that can go anywhere from, they hate salespeople, they hate white people, they hate black people, they hate men, they hate women, whatever it is that I'm doing that. Okay. So that's part of the narrative that I'm communicating into, and no judgment. I just acknowledge it. Because if I'm trying to influence it, I got to remove my sense of judgment of what's good and bad. And I got to just acknowledge what is if I'm trying to influence. And so then if I'm doing that, then I go, okay, maybe it's, the team was just acquired and they're under a lot of stress and I'm trying to sell, or maybe it's the market is shifting, or maybe they're going through divorce. All of those are part of the noise and the conversations and the frames that they're functioning from that can cloud my message. And so I have to be really tuned into who I'm communicating with. It's just why I think people say, Rene, how much time do you spend preparing for talks? And I'm like, 30 years. Go, what do you mean? I said, well, I don't spend much time preparing the talk anymore. I spend most of my time listening to the client. And because it's about what's really real to them, what's going on for them. I walk the audience typically in every audience and I try to shake as many hands, have a few conversations before I go, because it gives me a feel for who's in the room. And then I can structure my presentation. And I ask leaders, what are they facing right now? What's going on? What's happening? And if I can understand that, now there's things that you can probably guess a certain industry is probably facing a certain, set of things. Mortgage is facing margin compression. It's facing interest rate issues, inflation, fear in the market. So I can kind of, if I'm in tune, I can do that. But what's the narrative that the person I'm speaking to functioning from? Because they might be functioning from, the market sucks and I need to constrict everything I can. I'm not spending a dollar. And, or if I'm a realtor, I'm a loan officer talking to a realtor, it might be that loan officers are a dime a dozen and I can't trust any of them. They mess up all my transactions. So if I know that that's where they're at, that would change the sequence in which I communicate my value proposition. And so you can have a great presentation, but if you're not aware of who I'm talking to, then that matters. Well, what if I'm dealing with somebody who thinks that this market's fantastic because I know that everybody else is scared? I'm not. I've been through stuff like this. I'm going to push harder and I'm going to outwork this market. And I'm going to be the one that's positive in it. I'm going to be a lighthouse. Okay, well, that's a different conversation. I probably shouldn't use any alarmist language because they're not going to resonate with that. I probably should talk about, well, what kind of opportunities and hear where they're at. And so there's a lot of listening that goes into, oddly, communication and influence to prepare the message. And I think Abraham Lincoln said, if I had eight hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 sharpening my axe. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that preparation. Even Cialdini wrote his second book, Persuasion, and it's all the things that happened prior to. And his are really cool sequential things that are, around, things that happened prior to being persuaded. But it goes even a lot deeper than that. So I think that where we're thinking about that is, how do I prepare the audience? And where are they at? What part of the brain are they in? Are they psychologically safe? Which, at the end of the day, if you were to say, what's the one thing? I need a psychologically safe audience to communicate a message. And then all of the things that fit under psychological safety. And there's so many ways to go about that. Sometimes it's listening, but sometimes there's things that I can't control. So maybe it's a different time that I need to do that. Sometimes it's structure, order, predictability. There's a lot of different pieces that I have to create psychological safety in. And then now, how do I communicate in a way that triggers the right frames or that uses the right frames first? And sometimes if I don't use a frame, my audience is forced, because frames are constructs of reality. If I don't claim a frame, they're going to choose one for me.
So can I stop you for a second? Because I don't want to assume that maybe I'm the only one who needs you to anchor this into a couple of, like, a practical example. So let me set up an example, and then maybe you could just catch us up with how you would assess where the audience I'm about to give to you is, and then how your frame would be set to speak to that audience. And I can tell you where I think the audience is if you need that help. So let's hypothetically say that I'm having a retreat with 40 of my clients. We just had one in Austin, Texas 2 weeks ago. And let's say that I had asked you to come down and speak at that retreat for 2 hours on the art of presenting. And it's 40 mortgage originators in today's market. So let's start with, how would you, and for those that are listening to this, I would like you to think about a group of people that you would like to speak to, and how to use the formula that Rene is about to describe with the example that I've given, to first understand your audience, and then secondly, set the frame to communicate to where that audience is. Take it from
Love it. So first thing, I always think of, who's the sponsor? Like, who's inviting me there? And that usually is the person that has their pulse on the group. And so I'd interview you, and I'd say, tell me about the group. And I would listen. And so now, knowing what I know about your workshops, they're not free. And so there's a high value associated to them. So by default, there's a self-selected group of people that find value in your work, also have the resources to do that. And to have the resources and to find value in that, also are probably pretty high functioning, and people that are, I would say, probably have a good philosophy of life. They're probably on the positive side. They're probably people that are looking and hold themselves to a higher standard. So they're looking to be pushed. And if they're coming to a retreat, they're looking to grow and change. And if they're that way, they're probably not going to do well with cliche. They're not going to do well with platitude type things. They're going to want something that's very highly applicable and thought-provoking. And so those would be my first thoughts that would kind of go through my mind. But I'd spend more of my time interviewing you, and what's the desired outcome, and who are they? What are they facing?
That was brilliant. So I'm glad that I asked the question. Let's go one step further. Let me create a more likely scenario for our listeners. So I have an opportunity to go and speak in front of 25 real estate agents right now in a real estate office for Compass. And the owner broker was the one who said that I could come in and have 20 minutes. What would
Love
you
it.
do with that situation?
Interview the broker owner
Mhm.
and say, how are they feeling
Mhm.
right now? And I would try to leave that as open-ended as possible and try not to guide the conversation. You want truth. And you talk about confirmation bias in the beginning, right? You talked about the brain seeks to prove itself right. You got to try to not get into that and say, hey, how are they feeling right now? And up, down, what's happening? Are they positive? Are they struggling? And if you can create a safe environment with that broker to be honest,
Mhm.
you'll get so much information on that. Now, you got to also take it with a grain of salt. Let's say the broker is upset because they're pushing them on squeezing them on margin,
Mhm.
and they want to get paid higher commissions. So they're greedy, So you got to okay, so
Yeah.
you got to sift through all of that. That's also where experience comes into play too. Is like having dealt with a lot of those different pieces, and you learn that stuff over time. But what's the broker say about them? And let's say it's a really high energy group. Is there any leaders in that group that you'd be willing to, that you could talk to ahead of time? Hey, how's the group feeling? And you can get, like a couple different people and understandings. Now, if you don't know, you want to interview people. And the concept, I think, for me is saying, okay, there's a couple ways to look at it. We were taught in school that we can't ask for the answers to a test. Like if you went to school and you went to your math teacher and you said, hey, can I see the answers to the math test? They'd look at you like you're crazy and probably try to flunk you immediately. And so we were taught we could never ask for the answers. But then we get into business and it's actually the opposite. If I went to you, Tim, and I said before our podcast, Tim, at the end of this, let's say there was a grading scale and I wanted to get all A's, could you give me the answers to your test and what would it have to look like? What would you need to see from me for this to be just a smashing success today? You'd be like, absolutely, man. Here's what I'm looking for. Here are the things. And probably some of it's like, I want you to be real. I want you to, I want to have no agenda. I just want to go. And I get, what does an A+ look like to Tim? You can go through that in the same way and say, okay, so what are the answers to the test? And you can do that in a transaction, one-on-one with clients. Say, hey, by the end of this, I want you to imagine that we're at the end of this and you get to rate me on a scale of 1 to 5 or an A+, like school. And what would an A look like for you? And if I were to do that and do everything right, what would you need to see from me to really score that way? And I want to make sure that we reverse engineer your experience. And all of a sudden people are like, wow, man, I never thought about it. Maybe they hadn't thought about it. Now you're getting them to think. But I would ask those questions and then I would then structure those to help meet them and say, okay, now let's just say they're on the downside, right? They're feeling low. They're below the line on the courage scale, right? And then I'd say, okay, so then what an opportunity to be the light. What an opportunity, because people want to feel a sense of hope, but you can't go in there and just be a platitude cliche. We got to get our energy up, guys. We've got to see the positive in things. You got to go a little deeper than that. You got to have some substance, some logos, logic that backs that up, along with a congruent delivery of it. And so when I say congruent delivery, I'm speaking the words that are coming in your mouth and the body language and the tone of voice that you carry. All of those speak with a sense of confidence and congruency. Because when we're speaking, what people are judging, even unconsciously, is the congruency of our message. If there's I'm really excited to be here today, Tim. God, just so many great things are happening. So the incongruency is the word to say I'm excited, things are great, but the words and the tone are going in a different way. My words and my body's saying this, and my tone's saying this. So there's an incongruency. The hard part of Amplify is that I tell people, it's not that I'm picking on you. I'm just trying to get you to be congruent, which means you got to look in the mirror and you might not like what you see right away. But then the changes happen. And so I would say that the big pieces, if you want to be the light, ask yourself contemplation. Do you believe that there's positive things that are happening in the market right now? If you don't, you might want to begin there and start finding out places. And because you're not going to deliver very congruently something you don't personally believe in. And so you've got to surround yourself with the right people, talk to the Barrys and the Keeping Current Matters and the Dave Savages and the Tim Braheems and all the people that have this knowledge and the opportunities that are happening. Begin with that and get yourself into the right place. And then for me, I look for what are things that maybe they haven't heard before or a new take on something. that maybe they haven't seen. And what's something that a refreshing look at something. and then always leave them with a skill or something they can do with it, an
Mm-hmm.
application of some sort.
How about in that formula, is there a room for leading with compassion with that
Yes.
audience? Starting there as a means of, because to me, it's all about connection. So, and I don't think that what I'm about to say is in any way inconsistent with what you said. It's probably just a different way of saying what you said with like congruency and all of that. But a part of the process of being an effective communicator, and it's accomplished even by just saying, hey, what would it look like, as you gave that really beautiful script about, for me to be an A+ for you? And then, let's reverse engineer this. Connection, you kind of have to lead with that. Like if I go up there and I am on the stage and I am all about me, whether I like it or not, no matter how good the words are that come out of my mouth or how good my posture is and how much I command the stage or how cool my PowerPoint is, all of that, there's still an energetic exchange that's happening here that is very palpable, that most people don't consider as fully as they should, and it has a huge impact on the result. And that energetic exchange is, you're up there. That's why you used to see me a long time ago when I used to do the Vegas stuff at Stephen Marshall. I always wanted to be upstairs in the smaller room. And I always wanted to take a chair off the stage and put it down on the same level as the rest of the people and turn around backwards and sit down, because I wanted to feel them and I wanted them to feel me, because I know that from that place, they are receiving my information in a much more significant way than if I'm separate from them.
For sure.
So do you ever go, like with this group of realtors, do you ever go in with because I think there's got to be careful, because you don't want to like stoke the flames of victimhood. You go in there and you just have it be a woe is me, revival. But do you ever go in and lead with some compassion so they could feel like, oh man, this guy cares? And then now they're open to your teachings.
Absolutely. And and I'm glad you clarified. What I was speaking about was how I prepare for it, not in the delivery. And you hit perfectly on delivery, right? You can't give a presentation without connection first. I mean, you nailed it. And there's so many different ways. I'll share with you a few ways that I do it and things that I want the audience can take away.
Yes, great.
I mentioned it before. One is, and I was working with, I did this thing called Growth Con in Chicago. We had a bunch of speakers there, and there was an up and coming speaker who I think is probably, I told him, I said, watching him speak is like watching a miracle. He's that good, and he's young, and he's still got to put it all together. I go, I want you to try something today. And I said, I want you to watch. There's 800 people in here. I'm going to try to shake 800 hands. And we got 45 minutes. He looks at me like I'm crazy. And I said, watch, just walk around and be like, hey, I'm Rene. Good to see you. What's your name? Awesome. And I just walked around and said, hey, so thanks for being here. I just walked around and I did that. And I probably got about 70% of the audience. And he's like, I did that. He goes, man, I got so many good conversations. I'm like, yeah. I said, and you know what the coolest part is? When you go on stage, it's your second time meeting.
Mm-hmm.
They've already connected with you. They've touched your hand. They've shaken hands. And most won't even know who you are unless there's been some good marketing about you. But assume they don't. Don't ever assume they know you. And I've done that so many times where people, they're like, oh, okay, they're ready. And they'll go, wait a minute, that's that guy that just came and shook our hand? Oh my God. And now there's this, I know him.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a real simple way of just connecting. And if it's a smaller group, stand in front and just by the door. Hey, welcome. Act like a host. For me, the next thing that I do if I'm on a big stage is I'll come out and I'll share a typical story about my mother. I was born in Miami. My mother was a former nun and by far the most influential person in my life. And my favorite part of her story is the fact that she's not a nun anymore. Thank God. And so I'll wait. And that's my test, right? And so I wait to see if they laugh. Sometimes they all just die laughing. Sometimes they're just sitting there. And I'll say, thank God. I go, that's my test to see if you guys are awake. And then they kind of get it. I go, and for those who don't get it, explain them to them later. Nuns can't, whatever. And then they all start laughing. And I said, so that kind of breaks the ice a little bit. Shows that I'm saying, we're growing up with a mother like that. We learned there's a certain sequence to life. And, when you grow up in a migrant labor camp, she had all these great ideas, but it didn't matter how good your ideas were if people weren't energized. if you couldn't crack the code of depression, you watch a labor camp, people are just depressed and they're sad and there's just not much energy there. And God, you can go on with a great idea in a book and nobody cares. But there was no budgets there, so we couldn't do anything. And she realized there was only one thing that worked, and it was the arts, music, song, and dance. And I remember she'd get together this group of street musicians, we call them Los Callejeros. I'd be, 5, 6 years old, a pair of maracas and a painted face like a clown, and open up the gates, and the musicians would play a conga player and a flute player, an accordion player and a singer, and my maracas, and we'd go in, and all of a sudden that person that was hunched over the corner would hear the music and go like this. And all of a sudden that energy, movement was like that. And it didn't cost anything. And it was available. And it took seconds to create. And so we looked at that and we said, okay, so if we knew, there's a whole bunch of lessons that come from that we can talk about. I said, so now I transitioned to say, now I want you to pay attention to the energy in the room. As much as I want you to hear what it is that I'm talking about here today, I want you to be more of a student of your own experience. And so pay attention. I want everybody to stand up so now I get compliance from the audience. That's one thing I think it's important to create compliance right away. And they stand up, so y'all stand up. And that forces them to put their bags down, put their phones down. There's just a lot of different pieces there. And I said, so look around the room. And I'll use that as a moment. If it's a body language course, let's say I'm going to talk about influence and there's an opportunity to talk about body language. So look around. You'll see there's a lot of fig leaves that you talked about, people covering their private parts. And, remember Adam and Eve. And I'll tell them, to build some self-awareness. I said, I always look at where people's feet are. I said, look at, if I'm on stage and I'll put my feet together, now they're physically seeing. I said, do I look stronger or weaker? I said, well, I'm taking up less space. And that's what typically, when we don't feel comfortable, we take up less space. And so there's that piece of it. And so then I go, when I open them up, so just pay attention. I'm going to have you do one thing. And I want you to notice the before and after. And I said, I want you to shake hands with 3 people. Go. And then they go and they shake hands and the energy, the volume of the room starts going up and everybody gets, it's all going good. And I bring them all back. By the way, if you want to bring an audience back, here's a simple way. Clap one time if you hear me. Clap, clap. Clap twice and you hear me. 2/3 of the audience. Clap 3 times, 100% of the audience, and sit down. And it brings them back. And so now they're all back. And I say, so what do you notice? And it's like, wow, it's energy and they're laughing, volume. And we start using this kind of a way to process what happened. But now they're connected. And usually I'm off the stage and I'm walking the audience at this point. So there's this connection where I shared a story about my mother. They had an experience of what's going on. They had a little bit of self-reflection, a couple aha moments. And this happens within the first 2 to 3 minutes of the talk. And so then I go into, I've got a challenge. And it's probably the same challenge that all of you have, is how am I going to capture your attention? How am I going to keep your attention for the next 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, whatever I've got here, in a highly distracted world? At the media, and I start going through this whole piece where I start with, I have a challenge. It's probably the same one. So we're going through and we're sort of putting the pieces together of connection and rapport through things that people go, yeah, me too. And I remember this is the second time they're meeting me. They're like, I know that guy. And so they're connected. So there's a lot of really fun delivery pieces that you can do to create that connection. And, that's one way. There's also starting with a story that's vulnerable. An ounce of vulnerability on stage goes a long way.
A lot of great practical takeaways there. And I hope that, I think it's important for everyone to understand that all of this stuff is completely applicable to even an audience of 3 people. Don't overthink that you have to be a stage presenter for these things to apply. Some of the nuances of it, of course, can be a little bit different. You're not going to have 3 people clap once if you hear me clap twice.
Right.
But the principles are important. So I'll throw in a couple of anecdotes to support what you're saying. So for me, one of the things that I figured out to do a long time ago, well, number one, I am acutely aware of when I'm speaking in front of a room of people, whether it be 5 or 500, that there is a dynamic exchange, a symbiotic relationship between me and the audience. And there's a dynamic exchange of energy. It's like very potent. And if you don't believe this, all you have to do is go practice your hour presentation in your walk-in closet in front of the mirror, like I used to do ad nauseum, and then go do it in front of 100 people or even 15 people, and notice how much more fatigued you are when you did it in your walk-in closet. And the reason is because you weren't getting anything back. You were just expelling energy and nothing was being given back to you. And there wasn't this symbiotic exchange, like I said. So I became aware of the fact that whenever I speak, one of the most important things is, how do I create an experience for me that energizes me so that I have something to give to them? And if I can give myself to them fully, then they will give back to me, and we will fuel this flywheel of back and forth for however long I'm with them. And one of the ways that I would do that, in addition to always having some type of an opening that would draw them in, and I never went around because I was super introverted. I mean, I could tell you stories that you would really be surprised, man. Like hiding in my hotel room when I need to go on downstairs because I didn't want to be around that many people. Once I got on stage, I'm fine, but being in the audience, like what you described of shaking 500 people's hands, holy shit, man, that like,
I'm an introvert. And I hate it too.
that's
so
a
I'm with
growth edge for me
100%.
for sure. I've gotten a lot better in that regard, but back then it was terrifying. So just a little tip. I often will say, I remember, I'm speaking to you like you don't know this shit. Of course, you know it. I'm also speaking to the audience. I think it's important. I think it's important for everyone to remember that you know what the important content is in your presentation.
Yeah.
You know it. So if you're going to deliver it in the same rhythmic tone as everything else, you're doing your presentation a tremendous disservice. So you really have to think about, when do I pause and let them take in that content for 2 beats? When do I say, write this down? And then you see all the heads go down.
Yeah.
And that fuels you, because now you're like in charge, and all of a sudden presenting becomes this really gratifying experience if you've practiced it and you mastered it, and you practice some of these techniques, because it truly is a giving and receiving experience where you're giving to them, they're giving gratification back to you. And then the last thing is, always, man, whenever I would speak on a big stage, the first thing that I would do is seek friendly eyes, is what I would call it. So I'm going to find somebody over here on the left, somebody out here in the middle, or 3 or 4 people, somebody out here on the right that's into me. Because the minute I lock in on the guy who ate the turkey sandwich for lunch and is now nodding off, I'm screwed. Because now that inner narrative is going to go that we talked about earlier, where I'm going to be like, oh man, do they not like me today? If I'm not on today, man, I really can't find my groove today. I mean, now it's just fucking all downhill from there, man. So I need to look at people. Oh, she's into me. He's into me. He's into me. Oh, he wrote down what I said. Great. All right. I'm doing good. Now I've got, a lot, but these are like little tips and techniques that everybody should be incorporating in some capacity, even if you're speaking in front of a room of 10 realtors.
Absolutely. I all of that's gold. And that's the beauty of this journey of speaking and influence, is that there's just an endless gold mine of things that help you connect with people. And all of these things are connection points. And I love what you said, which was, I say this all the time, if you want to set the tone for the room, you have to first set the tone inside of yourself. And we are that transfer of feeling and emotion, and that symbiotic relationship that's going. It's so right that our limbic system is that open loop system versus that mammalian, or excuse me, even though this is outdated, theoretically this is what it is. It's the more primitive side is closed loop, is self-regulating, where we don't connect. But the part of us it's more human is open loop. It's I do something and I wait for a response, and the way you respond affects me. Versus like a reptile doesn't care, it doesn't have the ability to, and so it stays by itself. So we get that feeling of give and take and give and take, and that beautiful open and closing of loops that are happening. And I think I love all of that. And I think that I was writing down here a real simple sequence that people can use, and there's so many different pieces, but the concept of empathy, transparency, and authority in that specific order I've found to be a really powerful way of communicating things, and typically a difficult thing. Let's say you're communicating a change that's coming, and let's say it's the realtors. You're talking to a group of realtors, and that they're feeling down, they're scared of the market, and so you can start with empathy. Say, guys, first and foremost, before we get started, I know it's been rough out there. I know that all of you are probably working harder than you've ever worked for half the money. And it's hard to find buyers. And man, when you got them, find a home. I get it. That's a tough place to be. Empathy, transparency. And quite honestly, I've never seen a market like this. And I sometimes find myself going down that negative path of how hard it is. And it's a battle to get myself back up. Authority. But one thing I know for sure is that now more than ever, we need to be adding value to our clients. We need to be communicating even more to our clients. We need to be out there getting innovative and sharing new ideas. And this is the time that we get a chance to shine. And empathy, transparency, and authority. And it's a beautiful way of bringing the guard down through validation and connection and empathizing with somebody. And then that vulnerability through transparency, which really connects you to somebody. And that tills the soil for you to plant that idea of where it's an authoritative thought. But now more than ever, you deliver that with confidence, right? There's an empathetic, I get it. There's that, man, this is a tough market out there. Your tone follows a congruent delivery. Oh man, it's a hard one out there. And transparency, yeah, and man, I too fall down. You notice how my tone changes and sort of this vulnerable, hey man, I'm there with you. And then the authority, but I know this. So now more than ever, we all have an opportunity. And if I can do authority in a group setting where it empowers all of us, you and I, it's just, let's say you and I, Tim, we're at lunch, but now more than ever, you and I, man, this is where we get a chance to shine, where we get a chance to be different. Or if you got a group of people, this is now us as a team where we get a chance to be different. Or you're on a stage where everyone in this room has a massive opportunity to be different and communicate more. That beautiful empathy, transparency, and authority comes out.
I love the formula. I think that formulas help simplify the process for people. And I think that if everyone can just remember those three pieces and then create an opening to any presentation that they're doing that's based upon that simple formula, it's almost like, tell me how you feel about this, but I feel like if you look at the body of a presentation, that you could almost make a case for 80% of its effectiveness is in the first 2 minutes, and then only 20% of its effectiveness is in the last, hour. And not because the content isn't important in the last hour. It obviously is, but it's almost like it doesn't matter what it is if you don't do the first 2 minutes right.
Yeah.
Because then they're never going to even take it in.
Yeah, well, I agree, because you're getting into primacy and recency, and there's all of the things and how things begin. My mother used to always say, sensitive dependence on initial beginnings. I think there's a bigger spiritual quantum physics sort of.
Say that again. Sensitive
dependence on initial beginnings. And it was what comes. Yeah, it was like, it's like you can apply it the way a relationship begins is the best indicator of how it's going to end. And so let's say in a hiring process and somebody shows up late, the first meeting. Well, the courtship of a relationship is the biggest indicator of what the actual relationship will be. If it's hard to nail down a time, man, it's just always difficult. There's always an excuse. There's always like, oh man, shoot, man, I got to cancel, or I got to do something, or they show up 20 minutes late. So all of this difficulty in the courtship is probably where you got to put a lot of sensitivity around it. Be really look at what's happening in this courtship, because it's very reflective. Now you can look at it in the science of sales groups. The first 90 days are the biggest telling of the first 90-day period of time is where a salesperson is going to either show you the SPQ gold test. That all that research goes into that 90 days. But in the courting and dating relationships, but also in the talk to your beginning, like how I begin sets the tone, sets the frame, and connects people or doesn't connect people, because they're making all sorts of judgments about us, unfortunately, on how we talk and what we say. Is it ego based? Is it all about us? Are we connected to their message? Did we prepare? All these things are happening. Do I like them? Do I trust them? Am I attracted to them and their words and what they're saying? All that's being done in those first 2 minutes. And then there's the body that sort of supports it. And then at the end, there's the recency effect of what's with the last thing is the lasting thing. I think Chris Voss says that the last thing is the lasting thing. So you always want to make sure you end with something really powerful, and being able to summarize all those pieces. And in our presentation pieces, most of Amplify is about the first beginning of how you introduce and how you start a talk, because most people know content. Especially if you're a pro, you have content. We're helping you chunkate the content, but we're helping you start. And most people don't have a very good entry ramp into a presentation. And it usually is through story and origin story. So it was a whole process that we go through to uncover their origin story, which is all based on a certain period of time that values are formulated. And we look at now and how they identify themselves. We go back to that story and pick a story, either what we call a lighthouse or a foghorn story. Lighthouse is, I tell people, parents, you're either going to be the example to set or the warning sign. And there's either examples or warnings, lighthouses and foghorns. And we pull those stories and then we tie them to the business. what we come to find out, this is where we can get really deep into it, is that the work that we do and the tens of thousands of people I've worked with on this, the work that somebody does is either to serve one of two purposes, sometimes both at the same time, to either heal our past or honor our past. And we can draw that tether almost every time to something that happened as a kid that was either an honoring of a lighthouse or the healing of the foghorn. And the beautiful part of the healing process in our work is that if we had a foghorn, let's say, we believe in empathy, or we believe in generosity, and it's one of the things that make me unique, some of my personal values. Well, maybe it was a foghorn that somebody wasn't that way. They didn't show up, and they didn't, they were very greedy, or we didn't have much. And so now all of a sudden I had darkness in that part of my life. And so my whole life has been spent becoming the light. So it's a very beautiful sort of metaphor of purpose. And maybe my purpose is healing that. And for others as well, that maybe have had darkness in that part of the life. And I was given a morphe, that beautiful tragedy, so that I could be a light for others now. And all of a sudden there's this connection of the past and the current that creates a really clear sense of why I'm here. And I've learned how to tell that story. Oh, and lo and behold, it clearly ties to my business value proposition. And so all of these sort of dots connect over those 2 days. That it's an interesting journey to get there. I can't tell them that right away because it's too intellectual. You got to let them feel and experience. And I know it's a lot of your teaching style, which I love, is letting them sort of experience their way, very Mr. Miyagi-ish. At the end, it kind of comes together, and they've learned how to defend themselves, and just from painting the fence or wax on, wax off. But yeah, there's all of those pieces sort of connect.
It's in many ways, it sounds, I gathered most of what you just shared. I mean, not having been to your event, but I mean, I know so many people who have. And then also, I think the first one you did at my old restaurant, or at least one of your first ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ryan Grant was in that one, Megan from MBS Highway, et cetera. So I've heard from many people, and you just like kind of filled in a couple of small gaps that I had. And what I had concluded and feel even more conclusive of now is that it's also a spiritual journey that you're taking them on. You're taking them through, in many cases, I would imagine, even a healing process, or if not a healing process, in some people's cases, an opportunity to see through the lens of gratitude, of like, wow, like this moment in my life has really curbed who I am, and that part of me that I really like, and then weaving, because how we do one thing at my partner, Julie Wykes, who I don't know if you ever met, she's been a coach with me for 10 years. She's said for years now, like, how you do one thing is how you do everything. I mean, you don't like shut it off. You may carry it in a more subtle way when you go home versus at the office, but you still do things in a similar way. So I would imagine that it's very easy to find within that story the connection to how you're doing that in your business, whether it be a positive outcome or not, and then being able to work with that. So they tell this story which endears them to the audience, right? Because there's a level of vulnerability that's happening. So they're opening up their heart and letting their guard down. And then the audience can feel safe to do the same, and then connect with them for those 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. And then it's like, okay, now we can really begin with what I'm here to do. Awesome, bro. That must be really fun for you. I would imagine that there's a lot of very emotional experiences that people have.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's jaded me in the best way possible, in the sense of even the person, because we go through this experience, and I tell people at the end, because they go through this very powerful experience, and everyone's seeing each other, and I mean, they see each other. And I'll tell them the first night over dinner, and I'll say, okay, I want you guys to look around the room and see how awkward it is here. And I just smile. And I go, isn't it awesome? You don't even know each other, and you're sitting there having dinner. You're probably wondering, what the hell am I doing here? We got 5 hours at dinner. What is that all about? I said, but I'll make you a promise. You're going to look at each other at the end of the night, and you're going to see a different group of people. They're physically going to transform. You're going to go from strangers to like, oh man, these guys are pretty cool. Then I'm going to ask the same question tomorrow night, and you're going to see a very different group. Now you're going to probably see a group of friends. You're going to see people's stories. And then by day 3, you're going to look around again, and you're going to see another group, which you might even say is family, a family that you choose, that you want to be around, because you see their story, you see their courage, you see their pains, you see their triumphs. And now all of a sudden you see this full picture, which becomes what I call the source of the narrative gap, which we have with people. And now all of a sudden we go through that and we say, okay, well, wow. And what's really cool, part of why we get people to tell story, and I do this on stage, I'll bring somebody up and and they have all sorts of body language quirks and cues and nerves, and they're trembling and things like that. And the moment I help them tap into a story, all of it goes away.
Mm.
And
Why is
they
that,
just,
do you think?
well, part of what's cool is when you're recounting a story, I tell people memories are memorized. So authenticity requires no preparation. And so we can't prepare to be authentic in some ways. And what it does require is courage to hit play on the now. And so if I'm like, which is what I told myself, my preparation for our podcast was to be present with everything I was feeling. Let go of brand, let go of my ego, let go of how it might look. If I get emotional, so be it. Like, try to just be in it, which is why I shared stories. I go, God, I can't believe I shared that story. But that was what was most real in the moment right there. And I didn't plan for that. I'm embarrassed by the story because I don't like it, but hell, it was what I was feeling, right?
Why was it your
And
goal? Why was
why
that
was it
your
goal
goal?
to be,
Why
well,
was it your
because
goal as your intention for the podcast? I'm curious.
out of respect for you, of you first, and out of respect for what I believe you represent. And
Thank you.
so, yeah, and I think it was those two. And I get emotional about that because of my gratitude for you, what you did for me at an early age, and the those pieces are never forgotten. And so to me, it's like, okay, so as a mentor, I always looked at you as one. The biggest gift you can give somebody is a mentor is heeding their word, or me is aligning with what I believe their purpose to be. And so that would be my preparation to say, okay, I know Tim is in this. He doesn't want something that's been redundant. He doesn't want something that's been rehashed and regurgitated. So best way, let go. And so, but I think go back to the lesson was you get people into the processing of a memory, and things take over because it bypasses that judgment because you're recounting truth. At least in my version of what I remember the truth to be. There's, the memory
Yeah.
is
Sketchy.
debatable,
Yes.
sketchy, right? But I'm recounting my best version of a truth that happened and existed. And what also happens is you tap into your value system. And so when you go back and, so I'll just, you want to play the game real quick, just
Sure.
for fun? We'll do a short version of it. So
Yep.
I tell people, who are you? What do you do? What makes you unique? And what happens is they typically approach it from the perspective, like, Tim, like, give me the short, quick answer. Who are you? What do you do? What makes you unique?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do feel a little bit put on the spot. My name's Tim Brahim. I am a business and life coach and teacher. And what makes me unique is that I think that I can communicate in a way that helps people, and I speak from my heart a good percentage of the time, which is why I think it helps people.
Okay. So now what happened was you fell into what I call the question trap. And so the question trap is three components. One is most people don't put much thought into the questions that they ask. We feel compelled to answer questions that are asked of us, even if they're not good questions. And the person asking the question is usually leading. And so if I put those three together, I had this aha one day. I'm like, wow, I feel compelled to let somebody lead me down a path that they didn't put much thought into when I just fall into the trap. I'm like, I don't like that. And so most of my time, my kids call me a philosopher. I spend most of my time just thinking and philosophizing. So stupid shit like that. So I go, okay, let's get out of that trap. And if I were to say, okay, and I usually will draw a mind map and I'll put the word unique down and I'll say, okay, so Tim, give me 3 to 5 words that make you unique. I heard you're a good communicator. You speak from the heart and you like to help people. Is there any others?
I have a lot of energy.
Energy.
And I think
Okay.
it's infectious. I like to have a good time. And I am somebody who likes to create experiences for people, and I use my creative and strategic mind in combination to create incredible experiences for people.
Love it. Strategy. Okay. And there's also another word you said earlier, curiosity.
Uh, I said that word earlier in the show, and it's absolutely one of my favorite words in the English language because I think it's where all growth happens from, is that curiosity. And
So
I
there's
think
there's
I'm a very curious person, I would say. I mean, I definitely like that aspect of me.
so one of the things, and this is a side note to this process, is I tell people you need to learn to listen to people's values, listening to people's values, and it will sneak out. And I believe my frame is people are screaming their values at me all the time. I'm just not listening. And if I then go, okay, I'm just going to listen to what's either repeated or say one of my favorite words is, I kind of earmark that. Okay, so curiosity is important to them. And so then there's all those things. So if you can learn to do that, that's a really powerful tool to be able to then strike a conversation with. So I heard positive, infectious energy. You like to create experiences. Communication is important to you. Strategic, right? Hell yeah, you are. If you've never done an event with Tim, oh my God, it is to this day one of the coolest and most grueling experiences, but God, what an amazing outcome that was. You like to help people and you have a love of curiosity. Would you say that those are somewhat reflective of your personal values?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. So that, and I asked that question
never made that connection before until just now, by the way. So thank you for that. Yeah, but that definitely aligns with my values, because my number one love language is acts of service. So it's like, I like to create experiences for people that move them. Right. So it's like, yes, my values are very much in alignment with all that.
Love that. And so here's what's cool about the side note. Another side note is you've done values exercises and how grueling it can be. And I spent 30 years going through values exercises and I hated every one of them. And then I finally got to this question of what makes you unique. And it was sort of this backdoor approach where people they set them right away, because we like to live into our values. And almost what makes you unique, there's also a hint of what would I be proud of being? So I'm going to say what I would want to be. So I'm projecting into who I want to be, which is usually a reflection of my values. And I get them in seconds. It's kind of a wild hack. So what's also cool about that is that our values are formulated in the brain between the ages of 9 and 13. And so there's this critical period of 9 to 13. Now they say that they're locked in by 21, and the rest of our lives, they don't change. They just reprioritize, right? Sometimes in life, we put family in the bottom because we're working on career. Then somebody gets sick and all of a sudden family comes up. And there's all sorts of weird, really cool research right now. Even Wall Street Journal talked about sort of the country's values are shifted again, where patriotism was at the top. You talk about the American flag and all that stuff, and you could get anything you wanted. Now patriotism's at the bottom. It's kind of sad. I mean, there's a lot of really crazy things that are happening. So if I were to say of positive experiences, positive energy, communication, strategic, heart, helping people, and curiosity, which is the one that's most on your heart? Is it? I think you said it, but I just want to ask.
As a value.
Just which one speaks to your heart the most right now, currently at this moment?
Give them to me, please, one more time. And what I want to do is, kind of feel them internally.
Sure. I'll say them: curiosity, positive energy, experiences, communication, being strategic, speaking from the heart, and helping people.
It's close. But I still got to go with curiosity. I just feel like it's just yeah.
So now here's what's fun. So curiosity, it's not like something that you were a non-curious person your whole life. And a couple of weeks ago, you're like, yeah, I decided to be curious. Now you've probably been curious most of your life. And so if you go back to saying, okay, so at the ages of 9 to 13, that there was a critical period in that time period, there's somebody, and I say, okay, who was around and what happened? And so I would say, and that'll trigger one of two stories, either a lighthouse story where somebody was that beacon of light around curiosity. They were the ones that just really open your mind to things. Maybe it was a teacher or a parent or a coach or a friend or something, or maybe a TV show, something that just was that beacon of light, said, man, that just sparked that. Or maybe there's a foghorn story where you didn't have insights to something, where you needed light, there wasn't, or there wasn't a sense of curiosity. People try to stifle your sense of curiosity. And so if you were to think about curiosity, ages 9 to 13, who was around, and were they a lighthouse or a foghorn?
Foghorn.
Foghorn, perfect. And who?
I would say, gosh, I don't want her to hear this, but my mom, and I don't mean I hope my mom, if you're listening, I'm not criticizing you, but you're a conservative, very, very, structured woman. And when I was a kid, like, I wanted to be super curious, but I was held back from that.
So my mother is the most influential person in my life, was a lighthouse and a foghorn. So what I tell people is that some of the people I love the most are foghorns. And
yeah, well, that would line up for my mom being both. I could think of a lot of ways that she's a lighthouse for sure.
For sure. So let's just play out the foghorn side of it. And so what I want you to do is pick any story. Don't pick the best. Don't pick the right. Just pick the first one that comes to mind, 9 to 13, around the foghorn, about mom being a foghorn around curiosity. And start with, I remember when.
we're really going for it. Um, so it's easy and it's super vulnerable, no problem. So it was probably pre 9, but maybe even after I was 9. But so my mom was always protecting our family energy from my dad, who had a short fuse and worked a lot. And I have a constant memory of get your room organized. Don't be silly. Don't be silly. Don't be silly is like a reverberating phrase within my consciousness from my childhood. And I watched my mom say this to my kids when they were young, and it would like trigger the shit out of me. And I realized, oh, I know why it's triggering me, because I was told all the time not to be silly, to the extent to where I would go into the Jack and Jill bathroom between mine and my sister's room, lock both doors, and make all kinds of crazy faces and noises in the mirror as a little kid. And I didn't even know why I was doing it. Like I'd go in there and now I look back on it, I'm like, I just wanted to be silly and curious and try new things and grow. And I was always suppressed.
Interesting. So you had this, so the dad was short fuse. She's trying to protect you
Yeah.
from that. Don't trigger it. And so then short steps, but yet you still had this underlying piece of saying, I still wanted to do that. And so, okay.
So
now,
then when I got into my 20s, man, it was like, as soon as I got out of school, I don't know what happened, like something ignited in my soul. And from that point forward, I've just been a seeker, like traveling and learning spirituality and learning psychology. And like, I just crave even conversations like this, because it's just, I'm curious and I want to learn shit.
So now this is the shortened version. This is typically 2-3 days, but let's say that we were going to develop a simple message to somebody answering that question of who are you, what do you do, what makes you unique. And so, and if we were just to take one of those values and play with it, knowing you can do this with all of them and a combination of both. Somebody says, who are you? What do you do? What makes you unique? Instead of saying I'm Tim Brahim and I'm a business life coach and, the same pieces, you might say, I remember as a kid growing up and, I had a father who was kind of a short fuse and an amazing mother who wanted to protect me from that short fuse. And the way that she did it was to, make sure that I always clean my room, be very structured and conservative. And if I was a goofball, I always wanted to, be silly. She would always say, now don't be silly and don't be silly. And that is, you hear that from parents, but it was really meant in my family. And so I remember going around the corner and, making faces in the mirror, and I'd look around and I'd always want to do something goofy. But there was something inside of me that wanted to play, that wanted to explore and wanted to ask questions, but I wasn't allowed. And now, of course, the good reason, because it probably would have pissed my dad off, and my mother was, in her good intention, was trying to save me from that. But I'll never forget. And when I was 20, I got out of the house and I got out of school. It's like something shifted in me, and there was no holding back anymore. I could go explore what I wanted, study what I wanted, do what I wanted. And that started a journey for me to explore not only what was happening outside, but also explore myself. That led me down the path of running and selling a business, to getting my doctorate in psychology. And now I get a chance to help executives be curious about their own growth and their own journey, and to dive deep and take all the lessons of the last 40 some years of my life and doing that and helping them go through their journey and not stifle the creativity, but really find that there's also a business purpose to finding those inner things that are happening internally. And so I do that by 360 experience, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's this sequence that now unfolds where I go, wow, okay, he really has that. Now, if you add what I call a couple of lily pads in there, maybe one or two more examples, short 30 seconds. And this one time I went, when I went to school, I got a chance to meet Joe Dispenza, and man, I thought I was going down this path, and you can follow a hero's journey in that. And if you can add in a couple falls through the process, I thought I had this figured out, and then I realized I wasn't being curious enough, and I found myself, I was failing the grade, and I had to go back and really look myself in the mirror again and really contemplate and realize I wasn't happy with what was going on. And so then there's this rise back up again, and we fall back in love with you and the hero in that journey. And then now he's got to figure it out, and then he falls again, and man, but now we're bought into you and who you are, and we're cheering for you to fall out in the journey. And all of these journeys, we've connected with the falls in the story, but most people don't want to share the fall. And so then now, but I connect in the fall and the rise back up, because here's the science of that. This is what's really cool.
Isn't it fascinating, before you get to the science real quick, about how all of us want to be seen, to go back to a couple of hours ago. and then we don't allow ourselves to be seen, because
exactly.
that's the place where the connection occurs, keep going.
Yeah. No, it's so true. We want to be seen, but we're not acting that way. Or,
Yeah.
leaders want people to be vulnerable, but they're not willing to lead first.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the science of that is we spend about anywhere from 33 to 50% of our waking hours daydreaming. And so there's two different pieces of research on there that kind of saying that basically it's a lot of time of our day daydreaming, and we're running scenarios and what if scenarios. This is in the prefrontal cortex. It's kind of this future simulator that goes out there and says, well, what if this, what if that, if I do this, if I were to say that, and we're doing that sometimes just unconsciously. But there's 2 points in time where we don't future simulate, we don't daydream. And that's either on a life and death situation. Somebody's holding a gun to your head and we're not really going out in the future. We're very present in that moment. The other time is when someone tells a story. When someone tells a story, we stop daydreaming. The reason we stop is fascinating. It's because the storyteller is now daydreaming for us. And so then we go, why do we daydream? Well, daydreams create the narrative of our life. What's happening? What's going on? And if I stop daydreaming and I allow you, Tim, to daydream, that means I'm allowing you into my brain to take up real estate to create narratives. And if I know that narratives are constructs of reality, you can shift the narrative, therefore shifting my reality by telling a really good story. And the most interesting part is that the brain does not know the difference between your story and mine. I become the protagonist in the story that you share. And if you don't believe that, have you ever cried in a movie?
A few hundred times.
A few hundred times, right?
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, I said, well, I hate to break it to you, but those are actors. It's not even real.
Yeah.
But yet your brain goes in and creates a story, triggers all the somatosensory input and everything. All the sensory parts of the brain are going crazy. Emotions are triggering as if it was real. And if it was you, you didn't win the game. That wasn't your kid that died. She didn't really cheat on you, but yet all those things are triggered as if the brain, now this here's where we get into really deep stuff, the I and the self, right? So there's the observer of what's going on, the experiencer of what's happening. That's a whole nother podcast. But the brain itself is in the story and I'm feeling it. And so now all of a sudden I'm sharing the story. My audience is going through the rise and the fall and cheering you on. Neural coupling is starting to take place where our neurons begin to fire together at the same coherent patterns. They call them mirror neurons. There's no such thing as a mirror neuron, but they do act as a mirror. They too begin to somewhat mirror themselves. And if you look at a functional MRI scan or a SPECT scan, you'll see that the brains light up in the exact same way versus Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which is, through the data points, nothing happens. But story, the whole thing lights up like a Christmas tree, but identical. And the storytelling and the story listener, so they're having the same experience. And this is through story. And I tell people, I said, do you think that's soft skill? That is one of the most powerful skills that exists on the planet. The ability to share a story, because a story becomes a narrative and the narrative constructs my reality. And the only thing that I know to exist is how I experience the world through my reality. Holy shit. I better be good at that.
What are the common denominators of top originators in the mortgage business? They're well scripted. They have a system for marketing themselves that generates leads. They manage an effective database and they have strong referral partner relationships. The other common denominator of many great originators is that they have a business and life plan, a roadmap, a guide for them to achieve success, and they have an ally, a coach, who assists them in the successful implementation of that plan. Performance Experts Performance Accelerator private one-on-one, one-year coaching program is now accepting applications. This is my company, and these are my certified coaches that specialize in the mortgage business. Go to www.mortgagecoachingnow.com and click on Get a Coach, or go to the show notes and click on the link that's provided in this episode. Now let's get back to the show. Thank you for taking me through that process and for sharing that with everybody that's listening. I now have such a deeper understanding of not only what you do, but why people enjoy being at your Amplify events. I could go down so many more rabbit holes with you.
Let's go. I'm in.
we could talk a lot about, neuro-linguistic programming. We could talk a lot about, Gestalt. There's so much stuff to talk about, neuroplasticity and just all of it. So but I am aware of the fact that,
Was that fourth arousal center that starts going? You're talking about?
yeah, yeah, I am aware of the fact that, that we need to bring this to a closure because I have to pee. So
Duty calls.
just being vulnerable. What, if you had an opportunity in closing to have a conversation with your 18-year-old self,
Ugh.
knowing what you know now, what would you share with them?
Oh man. Okay.
But you're not allowed to judge yourself. How's that for the spin on it?
All right. Okay. Let me
Actually,
take
I'm
that.
going to go a step further. I'm going to go a step further because there was something I was going to mention earlier about something that I do, and I'll duck it in right now. Like one of the things that I've been playing with for a couple of years now, and it's obviously it's working or I wouldn't be doing it still, is that every morning as a part of my morning routine, I write down 3 things that I'm proud of about myself. And that's a very powerful experience in terms of rewiring neurochemistry. And it can be challenging because I'll be like, I said that yesterday, but it's like, it's okay. I'm still writing it down again. If that's what I need to reinforce, that's what I need to reinforce. So we'll play off of that. You're talking to your 18-year-old self, but you're talking to him from a place of non-judgment and maybe even ducking in something that you're proud of about him. How's that?
All right. 18-year-old self. It's a boring answer, but I think really profound though at the same time. One is don't neglect your health. I neglected it for years. I got to the place of 45% body fat, 307 pounds. And I look back at old videos, the video I had created at your old restaurant, I just watched it today and I was like, I looked like, no judgment, I was much heavier. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I was heavier. So I'd say that, one, prioritize my health in all aspects. The other piece is spend time nurturing relationships. There's so many relationships that I didn't nurture over time and that I just didn't do. And of 4, the third is save more money. Like it doesn't all need to be spent in the pursuit of, which probably leads to the fourth one, that I'm okay. I'm enough. And and it's okay to say no. Mm-hmm. It's okay to not be liked by everyone. Because I feel like which is ironic that it served me well in business. That fear of not being liked made me really good at what I do. It kept me up at night to just really understand the science and the body language. And then it drove me down a path of really dissecting the things that I never had. So there's a gift. And I love the fact that I had that because I guess it helps me be more compassionate and makes me a pretty good, communicator of it. But man, if I would have just cut myself a little bit break and trusted that it's okay to be alone. It's okay to not have to surround myself with proximity determined the quality of people. Allow some space and see who else has room to come in. That'd probably be one of the biggest ones.
So much self-awareness there and such a great tie down to something that we're talking about, near the beginning, which is, there's these experiences that we have that we can look at through the lens of what is this here to teach me? And how can this make me a better human? How can this help with me becoming more self-actualized? And then again, within all of that is, just the virtue of curiosity of like, oh, interesting. Yeah. Like back then I thought I was pretty infallible and ate in ways that were not healthy for me, but thank God, you're seeing that now. And I mean, I'm happy for you that you've lost 35 pounds, it sounds like, or something like that. You said you weigh 270 now and this was like 310. So 40 pounds. That's a
right,
substantial.
But yeah, but it's more of like probably about 80 pounds of fat though. So I look different.
Got it. Yeah. You put on a lot of muscle.
Yeah. Thank God.
Awesome. Well, especially when you're a road warrior, 235 days, man. I mean, you put some time in some hotel gyms, I suppose, last year.
Yep. No eating. So the simple rules were no eating on planes or airports because I was in so many of them. And if I just made that rule, it was enough of create the caloric deficit and then I have simple rules about what I ate, make sure I slept, make sure I worked out. And I finally figured out those simple trim tabs of just those few decisions made such an impact.
Yeah, I bet that, I mean, that is a very difficult lifestyle. And I mean, since you're a Huberman fan, I mean, I know that you've listened to a lot of content around, everything from circadian rhythms and sleep patterns and the importance of that and longevity, and certainly a lot of diet stuff. And I mean, his podcast is great, especially if you're a geek like you and I. So, thank you, man, for your wisdom and your time. It was really nice to reconnect with you. I would love to do this again.
Please, anytime.
Yeah, and
do we want to cover the happiness piece briefly?
I actually have to, beyond that of going to the bathroom, I actually have an interview at the top of the hour in 8 minutes
for the next time.
So somebody's going to just drop in on us, and I think that that'd make for an interesting podcast ending. But
we'll cover it next time.
I definitely want to cover it next time. We only covered 3 things on my list out of maybe 10. And
wow,
that says a lot, because we just allowed it to free flow, and I really enjoyed it, man. Thank you. And good luck to you, man. And get off the road a little bit more. Just slow down. 10%, would be huge. Right on. And I appreciate you, man. And I appreciate you too. And I'll make sure that I reach back out to you again when we have a little more time go by and we reconnect and have another show together.
You name it, I'm there, brother. I appreciate everything you've done. I love the impact you're having on people. It is by far unanimous, the raving experiences and profound experiences that you're creating at your 360 and the retreats and everything you do. And it's no surprise. You have that impact on everyone you work with. And so it's an honor to do this, and always so good to reconnect, brother.
Thank you for that very much. And thank you for helping so many people as well. We're both very blessed to be able to do that. So, gratitude to you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Take care.